tonight it's my distinct honor to introduce Dr. Terence from the National University of Singapore to talk to us about continuous authentication, still a thing after 20 years. So I'm looking forward to hear to this answer. But you can see, and I'm sure you have read about Dr. Uh, Terence, but I didn't know that he is a proud alumnus of Raffles Institution, which is the oldest school in Singapore. So, Dr. Singh, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm and kind introduction. Let me share my screen. Yes, and let me also call up the video panel so I can see, let's see, show video panel. Yep, so I can see some people. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Terence, and I'm very delighted to be invited here to share a bit of my research. I just want to thank the IEEE Biometrics Council for inviting me and for doing a lot of great work in biometrics, for biometrics, right? Today I'll just share this thing that I've been working on, continuous authentication, and feel free to use the Q&A to type your questions, and if appropriate, I'll just answer them during my talk as well, right? So a quick introduction of myself. I'm an associate professor and vice dean at the School of Computing and Office of Admissions at the National University of Singapore. I've been here over 25 years. My research areas include face recognition and biometrics, computer vision, and so on, right? And recently, deepfakes. And this is how you can reach me, my email and my web. Okay, so let me begin by having a poll, and let me activate it. This is using Poll Everywhere, which I'm sure everybody knows. You can feel free to use it and let me know how much do you know about continuous authentication. Okay, can we just take like maybe 30 seconds to do this? Okay, maybe I should flash to this. And watch the answers come in. Okay, great, great, great. Okay. Oh, okay. It seems to have stabilized. Nope, it's going up a bit more. Oh, okay. So as you can see, a lot of people know a lot already. There's an equal size group that don't know too much about it, and few have never heard of it. Okay, no problem. So I'm actually among experts, right? There's a lot of people who know a lot as well. Okay, great, great. Thank you, thank you. Okay, I appreciate that. I just want to get a sense of where you're coming from, your background, and hopefully this will give you more insights, and we can have some interesting discussion as well. Okay, so let me continue. So let's begin with authentication, right? So for the sake of people who have not heard of it, I know it's few people, but let me just quickly cover this background. So every one of us familiar with traditional authentication, right? Which is one-time authentication. So here's a screenshot from when I need to log into my PC. I get asked for my username and password. I can use smart card or other forms of PIN and other ways to authenticate, right? But this is a one-time authentication. And one problem with that is something called session hijacking, right? Which is that after the initial login, somebody can hijack my session, right? Knocks me out and then dispose my body and then takes over my computer, right? Or my handphone, my smartphone. So it's called session hijacking, and the system doesn't know because the system thinks I'm still there because I did the initial login. Okay, so people have come up with a way to address this issue, and one of the ways is called continuous authentication. So one of the very first papers on continuous authentication, this one by Klosterman and Ganger, it's a CMU Tech report, May 2000, over 20 years ago. And there the authors protect a Linux system, okay, by running a face recognition. Okay, here they call it signal processing system, and because we are a biometrics community, so we'll call it biometric system, right? So that is done separately on a Windows NT PC, okay? And you can see the frame rate, the face recognition done at about 4.63 frames per second. Slow by today's standard, but sufficient to protect this Linux system, right? So this is one of the earliest one. Shortly after that, we know that September 11 happened. And then in response to that, Cassandra Carrillo, in her PhD thesis in 2003, wrote about continuous biometric authentication for authorized aircraft personnel, right? So here's a diagram from her thesis where she proposed using cameras and fingerprints, at least two types, to continuously monitor whether the pilot is at the cockpit, right? And then she discussed pros and cons of different ways of doing the authentication. So this was just a design. It was not actually implemented, right? But nevertheless, in a sense, this was a genuine and perhaps pressing use case for continuous authentication. There's a question. I'll quickly answer that. The question is, why can't the face recognition be done on the same Linux system? Or the one by Klosterman and Ganger, processing power. Processing power. In those days, the machines were still single core, and they found that they had to offload the biometrics because it was still very compute heavy, right? So they offloaded to a separate Windows NTPC, and they were using something like a Pentium 4, a Pentium 5, right? So you can imagine in those days the kind of CPU and the compute power. So that's the reason why they offloaded to a separate machine, okay? But that's a great question. These days you don't have to. Our machines are powerful enough. We have multi-core, multi-threading, and so on, right? And we have more lightweight computation possible. So that's a good question. So as with anything, I think it's good to get a sense of what do we mean by continuous authentication, right? So there are various nuances of it. I give you two here. The first one says continuous authentication is about continuously and passively monitoring users by means of recognizing user features and actions during a session. Okay. And then by a different group of authors, CA, continuous authentication, refers to a security mechanism that monitor user actions at every point in time, or at least with a high frequency, during a session, and determines if that user is the legitimate one. And if it's not, then suitable defensive mechanisms should be put in place, right? So the second one by Gonzalez et al. Also talks about what to do if the system detects that, you know, an imposter or somebody else is there, okay? Or else the first definition doesn't. Okay, so I'll leave that for your consideration. But the whole idea is that it must be continuous or at least with sufficient frequency, okay? So the Klosterman was 4.63 frames per second. Is that fast enough? Do you want it to be faster? We can talk about that, right? But let me emphasize that CA was developed and imagined to be to enhance rather than replace one-time authentication, right? So you could imagine a system which is protected by a one-time authentication, which can be multi-factor and so on, right? But after the initial login, continuous authentication kicks in and continually assures the system that the legitimate user is there, right? So it's not a replacement. And as and when the system feels like you can go back to another one-time authentication, for example. So it's meant to work in conjunction with OTA. Okay. So I think I'll skip this since most people here know a lot or know some about it. Oh, let me just skip this. Okay, and let me just jump straight into the challenges of doing continuous authentication. So number one, actually it's in no particular order, but one of the thing that you need to worry about is that continuous authentication must be done passively, right? You cannot repeatedly ask the user for the PIN. Okay, it will annoy the hell out of the user and they will stop using your system. Okay, so in this regard, biometrics is actually very good for this, right? A camera, as you can see now, a camera can passively monitor the user at all times, right? If the user is speaking, then a microphone can also do its job. Okay, so CA must be done passively. Second issue, CA should have minimal overhead, right? Because when you do periodic or frequent biometrics authentication, then you could run into computation overhead and so on. And if it's done on a smartphone, you could drain the energy real quick. Okay, so you really want minimal overhead. Thirdly, of course, most important, the goal of authentication is to make sure the right person is there, right? So you want to achieve low error rates, okay? You don't want high FAR, you don't want high FRR, right? And into this community, I don't have to define these terms. However, I would argue that these traditional metrics, FAR, FRR, are not adequate for continuous authentication. Why? Because they don't take time into account. Okay, FAR, FRR are great for one-time authentication, but we need something more, and I'll introduce that shortly. Okay, but the point of this slide here is to say that CA needs to achieve low error rates, right? And the fourth issue that you have to deal with would be that a CA must provide authentication certainty at all times. In other words, it must be possible at any time to determine whether the legitimate user is still present, is still the one operating the system, whether it be the aircraft cockpit or the computer system or whatever it is, right? And you must still do that even when there is no observation of the user. Okay, when your camera doesn't see the person, when your microphone doesn't pick up his voice, you must still be able to determine the probability that the user is still there. Okay, so those are the challenges, and many people have implicitly or explicitly tried to address these challenges. Okay, so what does a CA system look like? In case you have not seen one, let me just describe a CA system. This is the one that we built back in 2005 and improved upon it in 2007, right? So you can see the picture here. We are protecting a computer system, and you can tell that it's long ago, right? Because the monitor is an old CRT. It's not even LCD back in those days, those good old days. And what we did was we put a camera right here. Okay, this one does face verification once every 2 seconds. So half a hertz, right? Once every 2 seconds. And then we also use this special mouse. Now, if you look closely at this mouse, where my pointer is, there is a fingerprint sensor on the side of the mouse, right? So if you are right-handed, okay, you can imagine if you're right-handed, if you look at the camera, if I'm holding the mouse right-handed, then my thumb is right over the fingerprint sensor. Okay, so this makes it easy, and you don't always have to ask the user, put your finger there, right? It's as long as the user is using the mouse, the thumb is always there, and then you can do passive fingerprint verification. So we didn't build this hardware. This was purchased. There's a company called SecuGen. I'm not sure if it's still around, but we bought this and they provided the API for us to make use of it. Okay, so this was the system we built. A little bit more information. And this was built with Sandeep Kumar, my co-author, and I see that he's here attending this webinar. Hi, Sandeep. Good to see you here as well. So this was the system architecture. We had to modify the Linux kernel, and in those days it was the Linux 2.4.26 on the Red Hat 9.0 distribution. So we modified the kernel to have this callback, right? And then at the user space, we would have an integrator. This is a process that's running that combines the biometric evidence observation from the mouse, from the fingerprint rather, from the fingerprint and from the camera, right? So it's done in a probabilistic way using a hidden Markov model. I won't go into the details now. And that's integrated with the Linux KDM and the PAM, right? The authentication module. Okay. So the idea is that the integrator outputs a probability of whether the user is there. And then depending on the threshold, then you can decide whether or not it's an imposter or the genuine user, right? And because this is integrated into the OS, suppose we detect an imposter, right? Then the system can do a few things, right? It doesn't have to, of course, it can kick the user out. It can lock the screen, lock the keyboard, and so on. But that could be a bit too harsh because we are part of the OS. We can actually maybe delay certain process, delay the process of the user and allow other processes to go on. Or we can allow the user to read but not to write. Okay, so we have fine-grained control because we are now part of the OS. Okay, so this is something that we actually built and we tried it out. Subsequently, we extended it onto the Windows XP Professional as well. Okay, similar idea, the details are different. And just quick, give you a quick idea of how this is working. So it's pretty fast, right? We can detect an imposter within 3 seconds. So if somebody comes over and just sits into my chair, in 3 seconds, the system recognizes it, right? Based on the camera, primarily the camera, right? And 3 seconds, we time it. It's too fast for the user to type RM minus RF star. Okay, so we're quite pleased with that. Okay, so that gives you a sense of what a continuous authentication system looks like. Of course, these days, a lot of work has moved on to continuous authentication for the smartphone, okay, because this little device has all kinds of sensors and is powerful enough to do this. Okay, so at this point, let me give a quick overview of the past 20 odd years. And this is a snapshot, a small sample of the publication. There's a lot of publications. Okay, if you do a Google search or use various tools. So this was created by this tool called Research Rabbit. Okay, and it's a snapshot of the papers. So you can see that before 2000, there's maybe only 1 or 2 papers. Okay, and then in the first 10 years, 2000 to 2010, there was some interest, but not a whole lot. Okay, and our system that we built was 2005 and 2006. So we were one of the early ones to build a system, and there were a few other people. Okay, but since 2010, the number of research papers has really ballooned, right, or exploded, as you can see here. Okay, all the way to the current day. So really, the interest has sharply taken off in the past 10 years. Okay, showing that this is really a very active area. In fact, if you just look at survey papers, okay, just survey papers alone, there are 24. Look at this table here, right? So this is a meta review by Zhang et al. 2022. Okay, and they looked at the recent literature review. Okay, and there are already 24 covering different periods, right? Each survey paper covers a certain period. Okay, and you can see that the number of references, okay, this tells you that a lot of papers and it's growing year by year. And these authors, Jiang themselves, they have over 2,000 references. So that's huge. That's a huge meta-analysis, right? And what's cool about this analysis is that they do what is called citation network analysis. And here's a picture I took. Here's a figure I took from their paper, right? Where they displayed as a very nice graph, color coded with sizes and edges and so on. And so they were able to identify 4 clusters, right? The red, the green, the orange, and the light blue. And they go into that in their paper. So suffice to say that really the interest has skyrocketed in the past 10 years. Now, if you look at all the research papers, or most of them, you come to the conclusion that continuous authentication went from protecting desktop systems into mobile devices, your tablets, your phone, but also into IoT devices. Okay, so this would include your webcam at home, looking at protecting your house, to your wearables, your smartwatch, to other IoT devices, okay, and other sensors. So really a lot of research has gone into these 2 kinds of devices, right? And you can understand why, right? Especially in smartphone itself. In a typical smartphone, these are all the sensors you can find. There's really a lot of smartphone sensors, and you can use any and all of them to do continuous authentication. Okay, and indeed, researchers have done that. So in the next few slides, I'm going to quickly walk you through all the different things that people have tried. Okay, you name it, people have tried it. So the obvious one is face, right? Most cameras are armed with, most phones have cameras, and it's natural to use the face. Okay, so you have a bunch of work. Okay, this is just a snapshot of passive face recognition being done for continuous authentication. Ocular biometrics, right? Whether it's the iris or the gaze. Okay, there are people doing that. Okay, and then biosignals, ECG, PPG, EEG. Okay, now obviously these sensors are not generally on your smartphone, but people have looked into using these for continuous authentication as well. Okay, and then on the phone you have your mouse, your keystroke dynamics, your touch gestures. Okay, so there's a lot of work done. You can see the list of papers and what they look at. There's even this thing called stylometry, right? Stylometry is the way you write. Okay, so my phone here, which is a Samsung Ultra, or even if you use tablet, it comes with a stylus, right? So I can use that to write. And so then the way I write is called stylometry. People have looked into using that for continuous authentication as well. Okay, motion. This includes picking up your phone. Just the act of picking up your phone from the table is a biometric. I didn't know that until I read papers of that do this, right? In-air handwriting. I guess you scribble in the air. I've never tried that. I don't know how good it is. Okay, or general free motion. Okay, and how do they do that? They use sensors like accelerometers, gyroscope, and so on. Okay, which are found in your smartphone. So this is pretty amazing, right? So really, researchers are very, very active to use anything and everything on your smartphone to do authentication. Okay, of course, you have your voice and your gait. Okay, because of microphones. The gate, there are 2 types of gate. You can use the camera. Okay, obviously it's not on the smartphone. The camera has to be somewhere else observing you as you walk. Okay, but you can also do non-camera gate using the accelerometer, right? So we call this the wearable gate or on-body gate. So if you have your phone in your pocket as you walk around, then the accelerometer can pick up your gait pattern. This is something that I have done as well, right? So, and other people have looked at that to do continuous authentication, okay? And of course, multimodal, okay? So again, this is just a sample of the many, many papers out there that combine two or more different modalities, face and voice, teeth images. Okay, this is fascinating. Okay, teeth images. I'm not sure. It's not quite dental, right? But I find this fascinating. Uh, Keystroke, linguistic behavior, motion, orientation, even using Bluetooth and all that, right? So all kinds of combination. I think you name it, people have tried it. Also, non-biometric signals, right? Things like your contextual signal, because your phone has Wi-Fi, has the cellular telephony, has GPS, has Bluetooth and all that. So all these can potentially be used, including app usage, right? Because the way you use your app, okay? I have a habit of keeping certain apps running in the background. For instance, my calendar, because I need to see when my next appointment is. I may have something to see the bus schedule because I have to catch the bus and so on. So I have these things constantly running. And so this could be a clue as to whether I'm using the phone or not, whether I'm still the legitimate user. Okay, so these are all, and I could imagine there are many more, right? So I hope that this gives you a quick overview of all the kind of research, and I'm really impressed by all the research groups all over the world that have been doing these things. So let me talk now about commercial products. Here, things are a little bit more disappointing. Okay, according to Gonzalez, Manzano et al., their 2019 survey could only find 32 companies with CA products. And maybe there are a few more in the last 3 to 4 years since 2019. Okay, so some examples are listed here. Okay, Unify ID, that was what was listed in the 2019 survey, but that's been acquired by Proof. Okay, there's Sensify ID, the product by Zigura. Okay, and then at the bottom right here, there's this NIMI or NIMI band, which is this wristband that you wear. It's not a watch. Its main purpose is for identification, right? So as you're walking through in your workplace, perhaps a highly secure work environment, there could be sensors in the office building or on the factory floor, whatever it might be, to detect this wearable, to make sure that you are where you should be, or you should not be wandering to a different out of bounds location, right? So most of these products are actually software based. Only a few are hardware based. And some are actually not real products, but toolkits, right? Where they provide APIs for other people to build their products. Okay, now many of these vendors unfortunately did not disclose their details. They just claim to be doing behavioral biometrics, or providing some kind of product. Not much details is known about it. So I think in the space of commercial products, it's still very lacking, right? If you compare with, say, the traditional biometric products like face recognition or fingerprint, there's a whole lot more products out there that you can buy, but not so for CA products. So let me turn now to some of the key issues in CA. I know I mentioned a few, but there's actually quite a few more that I'd like to share with you. One of the first issue is your criteria, right? What must your CA do in order to function properly as a CA? Okay, so back in 2007, my group came up with some of these criteria. But to give you the background, so recall that in a continuous authentication system, you will have biometric observations over time. So here I'm showing a example of fingerprint and face, two modalities, right? And each dot here represents some observation, okay? And the horizontal axis representing time. Okay, here they are all aligned, but they need not be, right? These two could be running asynchronously. They don't have to be synchronized, and they could come in at different times. And there could be times where, for instance, at T3, you have an observation for fingerprint, but not in face. Okay, and there might be times where you have no observations in all the modalities. Okay, so essentially this is what you're dealing with, and your continuous authentication must be able to deal with that. Okay, so one of the first things that we argue that a CA system must do is that it must account for the reliability of different modalities. Okay, so for example, fingerprint is considered more reliable than face, right? At least back in those days, and of course this can change over time as technology improves, but generally fingerprint recognition is considered more reliable than face recognition, and therefore must affect the authentication decision more than face, right? Because you are combining two different modalities. One is less reliable than the other. You need to give more weight to the one that's more reliable. Okay, so you must do so in a natural way. Okay. The second thing that a CA system must do is that older observations must be discounted to reflect the increasing uncertainty of the continued presence of the legitimate user, right? So the idea is that, okay, you as I sit here, you have a camera that did face verification of me right now, and then I walk away, right? And I walk away and I'm away for 10 minutes. You don't see my face, okay? So the last observation of my face was 10 minutes ago. So therefore you should reduce the certainty that I'm there, right? The evidence should be given less weight, okay? The longer the elapsed time, the more uncertain is the continued presence of the user, okay? So you need to account for that as well, okay? If you're combining an observation obtained 1 second ago versus 1 minute ago, then you should discount the older observation, right? You should use the one that you acquired, right? Because a good CA system should also use older observation, not just the current one, okay, in order to determine whether the user is there. Okay, and number 3, the third criteria that we propose is that it must be possible to determine authentication certainty at any point in time, even when there is no observation in one or more modalities, right? So the system must be able to check if the legitimate user is present. Even if the camera is down, if I'm looking away, looking down, I'm not typing, I'm not using the mouse, it must still produce this probability that the legit user is there, okay? All right, so these are the 3 criteria that we articulated, and I think most researchers implicitly or explicitly would have done that when they built their system, okay, which is very heartening. The second issue that I'd like to share with you is ultimately we want to see what our users feel if and when they use a continuous authentication system, right? So Sanka and I, we decided to look it up, right? To look at user perception. So here's what we did. We conducted quite a sizable survey back in 2018. We used SurveyMonkey and this thing called SYN to do the analysis. We got about 500, almost 500 complete responses out of 700 responses, because some people aborted and didn't complete our survey. 90% were from the USA, some from other parts of the world. That's the gender ratio. And this bar chart here shows the age distribution. Most people are between 26 to 40, okay, and so on. And then these are the educational background, okay, of the people. So I would say fairly highly educated, okay, and about 17% work in computer-related fields. So we would say that they are, in a sense, IT savvy, right? Okay, so that's the background. And we had a lot of different findings, but I'd just like to share with you a couple of them. So one of the first questions we asked our respondents was that, do you even use any authentication method for your phone, right? For your smartphone. In particular, do you lock your smartphone? Okay, do you use pattern, swipe, password, pin, fingerprint, or face in order to unlock your phone? Okay, and not surprising, most people use fingerprint, okay, followed by swipe. Swipe is essentially no protection at all, right? You just swipe the screen, and so essentially, a lot of people are not protecting their smartphones. I suppose that's not a good idea, but that's what happens. And the second thing we asked them was, these protection methods that you use, whether you find it convenient or inconvenient, right? Okay, so you can see that most people find it very convenient or convenient, okay? And so it's pretty easy to use. That's the feedback that we got, okay? So that's a good thing that we found out. And then we asked them, would you be willing to use continuous authentication? Okay, and these are the responses. Okay, so actually, to our surprise, most people are willing to do a CA, to use a CA if it was available. Okay, and it's further divided into two groups, right? The blue and the pink or red. HSA and LSA, it's high security awareness. I guess these are people that more aware of security issues, okay? Not necessarily security professionals, but it could be ordinary people who are more concerned about security and protection and all that, versus LSA, people who have no clue about or don't really care too much about security. Okay, so it's about 50-50 split between these two. The next biggest group will be maybe, okay? And of course, you have some people who are not willing to use CA. Okay, and then we ask them, what is your perception towards continuous authentication? Okay, so here are the responses. So it's about evenly split, right? About a third for each. So look at from your convenience, for example. Okay, the color code, it's about 1/3 for the purple, another third gray, another third which is the beige. Okay, and a smattering of others. So most people are neutral to very positive. In other words, they like the idea, they're receptive to it, right? And then of course there are a few that are negative or very negative. And when we asked them to give us their comments, we gave them a free-form text box to fill out. These are the comments that we see, okay? So regarding the resource efficiency of CA, it seems to me that continuously monitoring biometric signals will consume a lot of battery, right? So that's quite a concern, and especially if you're using your smartphone throughout the day, as most of us are these days, then you don't want to drain your battery too early. And so this is a concern, right? Another comment, I don't want my phone constantly checking biometrics. Okay, maybe it's he or she feels that it invades privacy. Another comment, I would like to see CA to allow me the ability to create different levels and the ability to assign people I commonly interact with to those levels. Okay, so presumably this is a request for using CA to determine, I guess, different access level. Because one of the benefits of CA is that if I pass my phone to somebody else, right, then because the phone is doing continuous authentication, it will know that it's no longer me, but perhaps it can say that, well, I've given it to my wife or to my trusted friend, then it can allow certain things, right? Whereas if the phone is stolen, then it can be more aggressive in locking the user out, right? So so you could assign different security levels, I guess. Here's another comment that's interesting, is to allow the device owner to choose which apps are okay to be seen by others and which are not, right? So again, CA could, allow my friend to play a game, for example, but not read my emails. Okay, and there should be a way for me to configure that. Another comment, maybe there can be a button on the phone that you can press before you hand it to someone. Okay, I guess a toggle to easily turn on and off CA. But okay, I suppose if you can turn on and off CA, then it defeats the purpose of CA, right? Because if I always turn it off, then CA is not helping me. Okay. Anyway, last comment. This person would like to see the icon that shows me if it is me or someone else using a phone at any given time. Okay, that's an interesting comment. So these were some of the feedback that we got from our survey. Okay. Now, some caveats that I should mention. This is the CA was not actually tried by the respondents. Okay, there's no such CA system. They merely watch our video that explains CAs. The respondents could be more technology aware since they were recruited from an online portal, and the people that respond to us may not actually represent the smartphone user base. So take it with a pinch of salt. Okay, so let me quickly move on to a couple of other things in the interest of time. The next issue I want to talk about is evaluation metrics, right? I hinted at the start of this talk. Now, if you read most of the research papers, people are still using the traditional FAR, FRR, EER, and also ROC, right? We argue that this is not sufficient for CA. They are fine for one-time authentication. They are not suitable for CA. Why? Because these metrics do not take time into account. In continuous authentication, you are protecting the system over time. You're authenticating over time, so you need to factor time into account in the way you measure success or failure. So here we propose a few new metrics. This is back in our 2007 paper already. Time to correct reject. Okay, so this would be the interval between the start of the first action taken by the imposter to the time instant that the system decides to correctly reject him. Okay, the time to correct, reject. Okay, so ideally TCR should be 0, no time at all. Bad guy comes, system rejects. Okay, but practically, you just want your TCR to be less than some time window W, which you can determine, right? For instance, the minimum time to type RM minus RF star. Okay, this could be the minimum time to do damage to your system. Okay, so as long as TCR is less than this time window, then your system is protected. Okay, so then we came up with another metric called the probability of time to correct reject. So this is the probability that TCR is less than your window. Okay, so ideally your PTCR will be 1. Okay, but practically you may be able to tolerate a probability that's less than 1. Okay, so this means that sometimes the system can take longer than W seconds to correctly reject an imposter. Okay, but we may be okay with that. Okay, so PTCR is analogous to FAR that most of us are familiar with. Okay, so that's one metric, and we define another metric called usability. Right, usability is the fraction of the total time that the user is granted access to the protected resource. So if I'm using the smartphone and I'm using it for 1 hour, what is the fraction that what's the fraction of time that I'm actually using it and the system doesn't kick me out or something, right? Or slow me down. Okay, so that's the fraction of time, and since the fraction it's a number between 0 and 1, ideally usability is 1, and usability is analogous to FRR, okay, the false reject. Okay, and then finally we came up with something that's analogous to the ROC curve, and that's called the USC curve, usability security characteristic curve, right? So this is a plot of usability on the vertical axis and PTCR on the horizontal axis, and a plot appears like that. So this is remember I shared with you that we built a CA system back in 2007. So we actually measured and plotted the USC curve for various W, right? Remember what is W? W is the minimum window, minimum tolerable window, right? That before serious damage can be done. Okay, so the window goes from as short as 0.7 seconds to about 3.1 seconds. Okay, and you get this nice curve, which is analogous to the ROC. So, and we're not the only ones to propose alternate metrics, right? A few other people have proposed different metrics because we all recognize that the FAR, FRR is no longer sufficient. Okay, so definitely please consider using these metrics. Okay, and then very quickly, let me share with you one of the concerns that we picked up from our user perception survey is power consumption, right? You don't want people, you don't want the CA to drain the battery on your phone or your IoT device. Okay, so we set out in our ICB paper, we set out to measure this thing called the resource profile curve of different biometrics, right? So I've shown you in this plot, the vertical axis is the accuracy, right? It's the authentication accuracy, okay? So higher is better. On the horizontal axis, it's a log scale, logarithmic scale of power consumption, okay? And we, so it's a relative measure, okay? And in our paper, we talk about how to measure that, okay? So, and the different colors that you see here represent different biometrics, if you will, that we run. And for each biometric, we ran different algorithms, right? So for example, if you look at the one on the top right here where my mouse is, that's actually face recognition, okay, using some deep learning model, okay? So it takes a lot of power, right? It's way on the right, but it's also super accurate, okay? So this is not surprising, right? The more compute power you put, the more accurate you can be, okay? So that's to be expected, and we get that from this deep learning face recognition algorithm, okay? Way on the bottom left here, this purple dot you can see is actually random, right? It's actually random, okay? So you just make a random guess, accept, reject, whatever, just randomly, okay? So it takes the least amount of power, but it's also very poor, right? I think we all know that. So it's not surprising. You don't do much, you don't get much on the bottom left. On the top right, you do a lot, you get a lot. Okay, so this is not surprising. So what is surprising is all the stuff that happens in between. Okay, so for face and soft face and geometric face, we have various definitions of that. We can read the papers for more details. We also looked at voice, we looked at touch and gait. Okay, so for each of these different biometrics, we ran different algorithms and we plotted them. And we wanted the upper envelope, right? So this inverted L thing is the upper envelope. That sort of traces, that's what we call the RPC, the resource profile of that biometric. Okay, so you can see that. So for face, it's actually pretty good, right? So you can cut back a lot on the power consumption and still maintain very high accuracy. Okay, remember the horizontal axis is actually log scale. So you can actually cut back by a lot and still be pretty accurate. Okay, the yellow curve, which is touch, it has the same behavior. Okay, overall accuracy is less, but you can cut back a lot. You don't have to do a lot and then still maintain good accuracy. Okay, the surprising thing here is gait, right? This brownish cluster of dots here. All the gate algorithms don't consume much power, okay? And they still give you pretty good accuracy, right? So IMU, this is gate using the accelerometer and gyroscope, right? Called the IMU. So IMU gate is actually cheap and good. You can get pretty accurate for very little power. So this is something that we like to see. Okay, and then you can do another RPC for memory as well, okay? So likewise for face, if you're doing deep learning, it takes a lot of memory. Gate, which is the cluster here, requires a lot less memory, and so on and so forth. So you could come up with RPC curves for memory and for power, and this is very helpful for you to, in fact, you could use this to design a CA to switch between all the different modalities, right? As in order to conserve power. Okay, you can imagine that you can jump from face, switch to voice, to gate, and so on. Also depending on what the user is doing with the smartphone. So this gives you a way for you to dynamically optimize between your power consumption and the CA accuracy that you desire. Okay. All right. So moving to the last part now, I'm going to quickly cover a few open issues that people have identified. So there really is a lack of CA data sets and testing protocols. Okay, the largest one has only about 1,000 users. Now, if you compare that with face recognition data sets, okay, now we have super large data sets for face recognition, right? Thousands of subjects, millions of images, not so with CA. So that's something that we still need, the community needs to build, and also to come up with a testing protocol, okay? In terms of international standards, there are actually nothing by ISO that have to do with CA. There's a lot on authentication and on biometrics, but not on CA, okay? Commercial products, as I shared with you earlier, there are only a smattering of companies and a few products. The other open issue is if you want to run CA on your phone, it really should be part of the OS. Not only that, it should really take advantage of the secure hardware, right? For instance, the TPM or the TEE environment, right? The reason is that you don't want malware to be spying or to be, you know, doing attacks on your CA system. Okay, so this is not a research area yet. I'm not seeing any papers in this regard, but this is a real issue. Okay, the security of running a CA in a real environment. Privacy implications are not understood. Okay, I've not seen too many studies on this. And again, CA attacks are not studied. So these are really some of the key open issues that okay. So let me sort of conclude with this poll. If you, I'm going to activate while you're doing this. I will answer your questions. Let me try and, where are my activities? My thing is frozen. Okay. Would you be willing to? Okay, this thing is slow. Let me activate it. Okay, I've activated it. Could you please? Yes, I see answers coming in. Let me switch over. Let me move this thing so you can see it. Okay. Now, as the answers are coming in, let me look at the, as the poll responses are coming in, let me look at the Q&A. There's a question. Lately, the industry is adopting zero trust. Can you shed some light on how CA will augment that? So zero trust, as I understand it, is about you never assume, right? One of the key ideas in zero trust, you always verify. So in this case, continuous authentication is a good thing, right? That you should always verify whether the user is there. You shouldn't assume that after the initial login, the user continues to be there. So that plays right along into CA, right? But zero trust could also be between devices. In this age of IoT devices, devices also need to be authenticated. Okay, so there is a body of work called continuous authentication for IoT devices. They are not authenticating human users, they are authenticating device. So that's a different style of doing continuous authentication. Okay, so devices must be constantly challenging each other, say, are you legit? Are you legit? Okay, and so on. So it is, I'm sure it's very useful for zero trust. Okay, so that's a good question. There's another question. IMU gate is less power consuming because ACC, the accelerometer, is running in the background all the time anyway. Yes, actually, in most smartphones, you cannot turn off the IMU, right? So it's running all the time, but it consumes very little power. Um, and okay, so maybe I should just end real quick. I see Ian is coming online, so I think I'm running out of time. So let's look at the responses to the poll. You can see right here. Okay. So most people would wait and see, right? 64% of you would wait and see and not jump to use CA immediately. The next biggest group, about 30%, right away without hesitation. Oh, great, fantastic, fantastic. I guess if there's a product out there, I'll tell the salesperson to look for you. You'll be the first to do it. And then there's a small minority that says, no, never. Okay, I'll wait for planet Earth to die, the universe to die, and then I'll still never do it. Okay, so that's very, very interesting. Uh, so, uh, thank you that. So let me conclude by this, right? So the title of my talk is a question. So I better answer the question. Is continuous authentication still a thing after 20 years? Yes, very much so, because as you can see, there's still a lot to do. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sim, and please accept on my behalf or from all of us our thanks for your wonderful presentation. You started answering some of the questions already, but
Yeah, sorry about that.
no worries at all. Thank you for answering some of the questions. I'll ask some of the questions. I'll ask my questions, but we need to finish by in the next I don't know 8 minutes or
Okay,
so
sure.
in order to be respectful of everyone's
Yes,
time.
yes.
So I see a very interesting question here, and the majority of attendees are students. So they say, okay, do you think these computerized online exams are using continuous authentication? What are they using?
Yeah, actually that's a great use case, right? That could be a good use case. You want to be sure that because an exam is over 2 hours, right? And you want to make sure it's not some guy taking over and getting the A's. So that's certainly one use case. Uh,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. So the other question I'll insert with all the respect to all the questions that have been posed, remember that we're going to send the questions to Professor Sim and he will answer each one of them. But what advice do you have for the students in the audience?
Oh, there's lots to do. Uh, you know, um, I shared some open issues, and these were not just from me, right? These are from reading the survey papers. So there's really a lot to do. It's still very fertile research problems. You can find great research problems. You can get a lot of good results there, and then they will really help guide. Remember, if you compare with face recognition took 30 years, right? If you think about it, you have the very first paper by Takeo Kanade in 1972. Then you have the Turk and Pendant eigenface paper, right? And then after that, you had the face detection, Viola Jones and all that. And then finally in 2005, you could do face detection and so on and so. So it actually took a long time. So hopefully with CA, that cycle can be shortened, right? We can take less time, but still, I think it's going to take a while. So lots to do. So please, PhD students, uh, jump in, yeah.
All right. So what advice do you have apart from the research project? Okay, they are going to continue on continuous authentication. But what advice do you have for them?
Oh, for the students,
For the
I mean, yeah,
students?
I think,
And then I'm going to ask you for the early career researchers, so you
or
know
the
what.
early career researchers.
No,
Um,
either.
oh, either. Okay. Um, some of these, now there are some very real practical issues, right? As I mentioned. And then I guess another thing that I didn't mention is theory, right? What are some, there seems to be a lack of theoretical guarantees or some issues. We don't know, we don't even know what questions to ask. Okay. So maybe think about that. It would be nice to put some of these things with have some strong theoretical underpinnings. I think that would be a good thing to look at as well. Yeah.
Okay. So, going through the questions, as you mentioned, what is the connection about presentation attacks and continuous authentication? Can we attack a system using a 3D mask, for example?
Yes. I think the attacks will come. The attacks will come, right? I mean, the thing is, whatever you're protecting, the more valuable the resource, the more valuable the thing is you're protecting, the more you're going to attract the bad guys, right? So it's the same thing with CA, right? So CA is a stronger deterrence for the bad guys. But you can be sure that if people are using CA, then the crooks will want to attack. This could include presentation attacks. This could include man in the middle attack. This could include side channel attacks, all kinds of things, right? So presentation attack is a real issue. 3D mask, holding a photo. So it's no different. But then now the bad guy has to fake the different biometric modalities, right? Got to fake my voice, fake my face, and fake my fingerprint. That's a lot harder to do. So maybe they're different. Maybe I won't use the attacker won't use presentation attacks anymore because that's a lot harder to do. Maybe there could be other ways, right? Malware, inject something into the phone, and so on, right? So I think those will come. We haven't seen them yet. So please think crooked, right? Please, I believe in what's the word? Be shrewd as serpents, but innocent as doves, right? If I may use that phrase. So think of how the bad guys will come, and then come and defend it. Okay, so we're the good guys.
So actually, you showed in one of your slides that making a random decision has only an accuracy of about 2%. You will think that they will have a higher accuracy. Why is that?
Oh, yes,
Slide
That
55,
the
actually.
RPC curve. Uh, yeah. If I just share screen just to quickly flash it. Yeah, right here, right? Random is
Yes.
very low. Yeah, maybe 2% is about right. Why is that? I guess um I forget the details. But it's just randomly um guessing over time, right? Remember, this is CA. And so it's the accumulated guesses of whether it's accept or reject, right? So yeah, so I
Okay.
forget the details, but
So thank you. Thank you. And actually, one of the questions is we talked about a gate being a weak biometric, but in the graph you just showed, uh, it- gate can achieve very good accuracy using
yeah,
accelerometer, for example. So what are your thoughts?
yeah. In fact, I think gate is great. Yes, in that thing that I showed, I'll show it again. Gate can exceed 80%, right? Right here. So it's actually pretty good. Um, so that surprised us, right? That we can get very good recognition from gate. But gate is only useful if you are, it helps if you walk around, right? If you're seated, then there's no gate. Okay, then you have to use other things. Um, Surprisingly, gate is actually pretty good. It's just what we found, and I think other people are finding the same results. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And actually, the question that one of our attendees asked, if this method is implemented in Linux using fingerprint and face recognition, we don't have to type so many times the sudo command. So that's a comment. Uh,
Oh, okay. I suppose. Yeah. I suppose. Yes.
so you talked about, and I want to close with this question, is that you talked about in the first system you delivered around 2007 that you had offloaded the processing to another PC because face
Ah,
recognition was not accurate. on this time. But do you think offloading makes it more resilient to malware too?
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so that system was not by us. That system by Klosterman and Ganger in 2000. In our system, we ran everything locally. So we didn't do the biometrics on a separate machine. As to whether or not it's more resilient, not sure. Certainly when you have to communicate between two devices, right? The Linux system that you're protecting and the Windows that's doing the biometrics, that communication channel could be attacked, right? So, but if one goes down, well, is it more resilient? I really can't say, right? Yeah, but I think in those days it was done just because doing everything on one machine would just slow the whole thing down. And
It was not into answer to configuration for malware considerations in the
oh,
time.
yeah, for malware, yeah, I suppose if your Linux system is infected with malware, uh, again, don't know, right? If your biometrics authentication is infected with malware, and then you could get the bad result, right? Because the malware could say accept, and then the bad guy comes in, right? So that could be a problem. So you end up protecting two systems, in effect.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. On that positive note, thank you very much. Please accept our congratulations since you cannot see our attendees. And I see thank yous posted in the chat here in the question and answer section. Thank you very much. And I want to invite everyone to be tuned for the next biometrics webinar. And Vito, I pass it on the virtual microphone to you for closing the webinar.
Yeah, so thank you, Terence, again for the great talk. That's really interesting. I think all participants enjoyed the presentation and then the discussion. And thank you for everybody for either getting up or in the US, maybe staying up late to listen to Terence's talk. I think it was really enjoyable and informative. So for anybody who would like to look into the webinar again, we will have it posted on the YouTube channel of the council shortly. And you are invited, as Yanis also said, to the next webinar, which we will announce soon on the website and over the mailing list. So thank you everybody for the time, and we can close the webinar for today.
Thank you, Terence. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Yanis,
All the
Vito. Bye-bye,
participants.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.